Well, it is no longer a matter of opinion. An empirical scientific analysis has found that Donald Trump is suffering from cognitive decline. Whether he can't be president, whether you like it, whether Biden is also suffering, those are all fair questions. But we now have the data. Trump's brain has declined. The 2024 election is a week away, and both age and cognitive ability play a major role this election cycle. This was going to be an election between 81-year-old Joe Biden and 78-year-old Donald Trump, in an environment where the American people said they were craving younger leadership following a disastrous debate performance in June where he seemed tired and confused, losing his train of thought. Joe Biden ultimately stepped aside with the now 60-year-old Kamala Harris replacing him as the Democratic nominee. Now with Biden no longer in the race, we have Kamala Harris facing the oldest major party presidential nominee in American history. That's Donald Trump, who has been experiencing very obvious cognitive decline, something that we've been following on the show for years, but has really only been recently receiving the attention it deserves from the corporate news media. The reality is that some level of cognitive decline is quite common in people into their 70s and 80s. So it's not a surprise that we would witness it in political candidates who happen to be that old. However, it's often what is called subclinical, often not materially relevant to one's ability to make decisions or to reason appropriately. But much of this is just conjecture. It's our instinct when we watch or listen to Trump. And something a little more quantitative would be nice, and that's what we now have. Researchers have quantified the cognitive performances of Biden, Harris, and Trump through an analysis of what they've said during debates over the last few years. This is very interesting. Researchers affiliated with the University of Southern California did a study on cognitive performance and linguistic analysis, and what they did is use an advanced language model named Claude Opus 3.5 to identify and analyze the linguistic markers of the different candidates. Now, I'll say a little more later about non-linguistic analyses about cognitive decline, but one very powerful tool in evaluating cognitive decline is how people speak, and more importantly, how their speech has changed over time. What the researchers did is identify 7 key linguistic markers that can potentially signal cognitive decline. And these include lexical diversity, which just means how varied are the words that you use when you speak. Syntactic complexity, meaning how sophisticated is your sentence structure. Mean sentence length, that just means on average, how many words are in your sentences. And they looked at the use of complex, clausal structures. That means sentences that have multiple clauses or ideas in them. And the study looked at the frequency of semantically imprecise lexemes or words that lack clear meaning. You use a word, and it's not really clear what you mean by it, as well as the repetition of lexical items or phrases, which when you repeat the same thing over and over again when you speak, and when you increasingly do that over time, it suggests that you're struggling to express your thoughts and kind of filling it with some small number of words you're comfortable with. And finally, the study looked at the prevalence of grammatical aberrations or errors in grammar as well. So this was evaluated over time, and the idea was let's get some insight over the cognitive functioning, not at one point in time, but as something that changes, ebbs, and flows over time. The researchers did this by using transcripts of presidential and vice presidential debates over the last 5 years. What was the reason to do this? Well, if you're looking at teleprompter speeches, you're not getting a natural reflection of how one speaks, the vocabulary they use, etc., because they're just reading a prepared speech. It wouldn't really give us information. So the idea here was let's look at the recent Trump-Biden debate and their 2020 debates. Let's look at the Harris-Trump debate. Let's look at pivotal debates from previous election cycles. And with this unscripted vocabulary and linguistic analysis, we can get a sense of what is the natural pattern and the way that speech has changed over time. Once the transcripts were collected, the analysis began to try to reduce bias. The transcripts were anonymized. So it wasn't, hey, analyze this Trump transcript. The idea was let's do an objective evaluation by anonymizing the transcripts. The candidates' performances were analyzed using this language model. Each candidate was scored on the linguistic markers that I mentioned. Score from 1 to 100, and this was done multiple times to ensure reliability. The results were averaged to try to minimize outliers and discrepancies. And interestingly, the study found only minor score differences between runs. So, there was like a consistent reproducibility here. So, let's now get to the revelations. Revelation number 1 is that it is true that Joe Biden, now 81 years old, showed notable decline in performance from 2012 to 2020 with a decrease in 6.5% per year. I'm sorry, 6.5% total, about 0.8% per year in linguistic performance. This was visible to the naked eye, right? I've said many times, watch Biden's debate against Paul Ryan back in 2012. Watch Biden's debates against Trump in 2020. And watch Biden's debate against Trump in 2024. Notable. And the analysis of the language found the same thing. Now, even more concerning, Biden's rate of decline appeared to accelerate from 2020 to 2024 with a decrease of 22%, about 6% per year during that period. So what this suggests is that there was something to the concerns about Biden and cognition, and that it arguably made a lot of sense to replace Biden with someone younger at the top of the ticket. So that's Biden. Let's now go to Trump. Trump, who remains in the race at age 78. The oldest major party nominee for president in the history of the United States, Trump displayed steady decline from 2016 until 2024. Okay, his performance declined 6% from 16 to 20. That's about 1.4% per year more than Biden, and from 2020 to 2024, about 2.2% per year. So there's been an acceleration in Trump's decline, including just over the last 4 months where Trump's score dropped 10% in just a few months. This is massive. And again, what's fascinating about this is that even though most of us aren't linguists, cunning or otherwise amateur, right? Cunning linguist, amateur linguist. None of most of us are not linguists. Just by listening to Trump, we notice, especially lately, that something is wrong. And the linguistic analysis done with this language model found that indeed Trump has been declining, and he's been declining more acutely precipitously over the last several months. The analysis also found that Trump's linguistic efficacy was lower to begin with, meaning Trump started off in a worse state. Whereas Biden used to have a score of nearly 600, Trump started around 400. So Trump, at some core level, has a diminished linguistic ability, and this is why we end up saying that he speaks at a 4th grade level during speeches. So Trump's decline more rapid than Biden's, ending at a lower point and starting at a more diminished value. Now let's be thorough, and we'll also talk about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is 60 years old. She's notably younger than the other two. And maybe not surprisingly, Harris had the most stability among the 3 candidates and the least decline. Kamala Harris showed such minor decline that it could actually just be sort of statistical noise. Harris's linguistic scoring declined 0.4% per year since 2020, and that could be reflective more of even cultural expectations of how candidates speak rather than any material decline. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Over the last 4 years, political discourse has coarsened, and the standards and expectations of how our elected officials will speak has degraded. And so when you see such a small decline in Harris, it might just reflect that culturally, we now expect candidates to talk a certain way. It's such a small amount, so bottom line, we can show you the trend lines now. And as you can see, Kamala Harris has effectively no change. Biden and Trump have both experienced notable declines in linguistic abilities. Now let me give you the caveats and the limits of this analysis. These figures are valuable insights, but we should approach them with some caution because the scores that we get from this linguistic analysis, number 1, are estimates. They stem from large language model assessments, which have limitations in precision. There's no doubt about it. This study focused on communication ability. That's only one aspect of cognitive decline. Cognitive decline can also manifest in other ways: memory function, executive control, the speed of information processing. Those would be other analyses. Anecdotally, we see Trump having major issues with memory. And you could imagine a situation where someone's communication abilities and verbal abilities might decline, but it might not reflect a decline cognitively. It often does, but it wouldn't necessarily. You can have some kind of issue which affects speech, but not cognition. The criticisms that Joe Biden received for his 2024 debate performance went beyond speaking ability. They had to do with energy. They had to do with that constant coughing into his hand, sounding tired, the gaze that he sometimes had. So there's no doubt that there are other things here.